Hello everybody. Next up we play host to Nottingham Forest. It's a 3 p.m. Saturday kick-off, for which Saints be praised. Trains, nothing between Liverpool Street and Witham. You know the drill by now. So Forest then. Well, their current position of 13th owes much to a post-World Cup fixture list that has seen them face a lot of out-of-form or mediocre opposition just at the right time. Apart from a Yuletide thrashing at Man United, the teams faced comprised Chelsea, Southampton, Leicester, Bournemouth and Leeds. The only teams in their recent run that could be said to be in decent nick are Fulham, to whom Forest lost 2-0 at the Cottage, and Manchester City, who somehow failed to convert more than one of 500,000 efforts on goal. All this has left Forest with 25 points from 13 games, which is 5 points ahead of us, so a win would be rather useful, please. Daisy was a bit concerned that their summer transfer window, in which they signed over 20 players, might be replicated this January. And this caused her to take delivery of numbers of cases of her favourite blend of extra strong coffee, in anticipation of a few nights slaving over the laptop in order to provide the information that goes into this bit of the preview. In the end, they only brought in 4 players on permanent deals, plus a couple of loan signings, leaving the poor girl wondering as to how she is to bring her heart rate down to more normal levels. The first arrival was that of Brazilian Gustavo Scarpa. Scarpa arrived from Palmeiras, having apparently signed a pre-contract with Forest sometime last summer. This transfer seems to have been a bit more straightforward than his previous move to Palmeiras from Fluminense. That came about when Scarpa took Fluminense to court as a result of them never quite getting around to paying the player for his services. With the court agreeing that this was a jolly unsporting state of affairs, they cancelled his contract and the player, Scarpa, to Palmeiras. Now 29, he holds one full cap for the Brazilian national side, though since that came some 6 years ago, one might hesitate to call him a regular. Apparently, his main hobbies include playing the guitar and doing Rubik's Cubes, something that's only really impressive if undertaken simultaneously. Scarpa was joined on his journey from Palmeiras by fellow midfielder who goes by the single name of Danilo. His fee was said to be £16 million or so, tying the player to Forest to the club for about 6 years, which conveniently avoids the forthcoming restrictions on amortisation of contracts. As far as Daisy can tell, the player has not troubled those responsible for monitoring international appearances at any level to date, which has raised a few eyebrows over the player's work permit status. It seems that they went Brazil nuts this January, picking up central defender Felipe from Atletico Madrid. Felipe, who at 33 is very much at the veteran stage of his career, cost Forest a fee of something like £1.7 million. He's got a bit of reputation as a bit of a bruiser, picking up a straight red card for kicking out at Liverpool's Mane a while back, and then last season sparking a melee in the Atletico versus Man City match, of the sort that commentators insist that nobody likes to see, but who everybody else seems to be able to find quite entertaining nevertheless. The issue was caused by a nasty kick-out at Phil Foden, which earned Felipe a second yellow, when in all honesty a straight red would have been a better decision. Let's hope that Bowen gets more protection from the officials than he got this time last weekend. The last couple of signings both had Hammers connections. John Joe Shelvey was on the club's books as a kid for a while, and the Romford-born midfielder is said to have commanded a nominal fee for his move from Newcastle. The other permanent deal was the signing of former Hammer Andre Ayew, who was a freebie, having been unattached at the time of signing. The loan signings came at either end of the pitch. Kiwi Chris Woods arrived in the deal until the end of the season, though the deal contained an obligation to buy clause, which was due to kick in after a certain number of matches, a number which it is claimed has already been met. Woods' arrival from Newcastle coincides with them beginning to flex their financial muscle, his original signing last winter seemingly being completed on the grounds that he was available and Burnley wanted to cash in on the player while they could. Goalkeeping options were bolstered by the arrival of Costa Rican custodian Keylor Navas. Navas has come in on loan from Paris Saint-Germain and has been pressed into immediate service as cover for Henderson, who has a thigh problem. Let's move on to the wild and wacky world of association football. The long-awaited white paper on the subject of football club regulation has finally been published. Now, I have yet to read said document, though rest assured I will do so in order to impart my pearls of wisdom on the subject at a future date. However, I note that Mr. Sullivan of this parish was all up in arms over the proposals. From what I can gather, his objections stem from the fact that he considers the current government to be not very good. Now, this may be a valid point, but if that's your sole point of objection, you're a fair way down the dangerous road of not judging the paper on its merits, particularly so considering the all-party input into the White Paper's preparation. If you have objections to the content, then say what they are, rather than condemn the whole legislation on the grounds that you don't think the people in charge are up to the job. It's a bit like objecting to murder being made illegal because the Met, who would do all the investigating and arresting, are a bunch of sexist morons. That they may be, but it doesn't reduce the validity of the underlying proposal. There'll be a lot more on this once I've actually read the damn thing. We have this week had to bid a sad farewell to two broadcasting legends. Now, for you youngsters, back in the day before a zillion dedicated sports channels came into existence, both BBC and ITV had competing programmes on Saturdays that would start at lunchtime and run all the way through to about 6 in the evening. The BBC had Grandstand, whilst ITV's effort was World of Sport, which was presented for the large part of its length by Dickie Davis. Dickie passed away this week, but he was the anchorman for a programme that featured live and recorded action before running a results sequence and bringing in live reporters from around the grounds down a phone line at the end. Now, both these programmes are long gone, largely thanks to the spiralling cost of broadcasting rights. However, back in the day, keeping a 6-hour live broadcast together was no mean feat, and Davis, who I had the good fortune to meet on a number of occasions, did so with a professionalism that many of today's broadcasters would struggle to emulate. I'd seek out a recording of Dickie trying to deal with peak form Eric Morecambe on World of Sport. Whilst it's very much Morecambe's show, Dickie wisely allows things to run their course, with his mate basically running riot. And then there was Motty. When you listen to a John Motson commentary, you always got the impression that he couldn't quite believe he was being paid to watch stuff that he'd have probably paid to watch. The fact that his genuine and obvious love of the game shone through every word was something that he shared with his contemporary Byron Moore. Though I suspect if either paid to get into the ground, you suspect Motty would have been on the terraces, whilst Byron Moore might have paid an extra bit to sit in the stands. That sort of genuine enthusiasm is not something you can teach at Broadcasting College. You've either got it or you don't. Standout Motty moments, obviously the Ronnie Radford goal that gave his fledgling career such a boost, and of course that clip of him stood at Wickham. Now, if you've not seen it, picture this. The pitch was under a foot of snow, and quite frankly, a still photograph would have been enough to convince the public that Wickham's match was off. However, Motty stood there in his sheepskin coat, snow blowing horizontally, to bring us a brief summary of the weather conditions. A few moments or so before they went live, saw him looking understandably cheesed off as that part of Buckinghamshire went all alpine. In a previous life, young Daisy used to work with Motson, and has nothing but praise for him both as a professional and as a person. And that's good enough for me. Farewell, Dickie. Farewell, Motty. OK, let's move on to us. Oh dear. Let's get this straight. Tottenham are a very, very average team, and that's being kind to them. And for about 40 minutes or so, that's how we treated them. We pushed forward, and whilst clear-cut chances were a premium, we showed sufficient intent to suggest that it wouldn't be long before something would transpire. Then we stopped. You couldn't even really blame half-time for interrupting their momentum. It was almost as if somebody had told them that they were playing somebody good. Oliver didn't help, of course. The booking received by Antonio for taking the ball cleanly from Kane being in stark contrast to the lack of action taken over the constant fouling of Bowen, whose afternoon culminated in his receiving of 2 red card challenges, which produced 1 very reluctant yellow from Oliver, who fully lived up to his notoriety within refereeing circles as a so-called Big Six patsy. However, that was a defeat totally self-inflicted against a side whose supporters celebrated long into the night over a match that they only remember when they win. And how embarrassing were those closing scenes, all those tourists professing their love for Son via banner messages playing across their mobile phones. I suppose that's one thing we've got to be grateful for. At least half our support won't be disappearing when our best player moves on somewhere decent. Injury news, and it seems that Cornet's in the country but not in the squad. Zuma and Paqueta may also be a week away, whilst Scamacca is now fit enough to be fully considered. Antonio has run his legs off in recent weeks, and with no other strikers available to share the burden. But his touch is, well, wildly inconsistent. Too often he'll kill the ball, only for his second touch to roll away harmlessly to a defender. Other times his first touch shows that he can trap a ball further than I can kick it. Now, if Scamacca's fit enough to start, I would start him and give Antonio a rest. This brings us on to the subject of the prediction. Well, we battered this lot in the reverse fixture. A combination of bizarre refereeing and poor finishing denying us the 3 points that we deserved, let alone the one we ought to have had at the end. Their form's improved in recent weeks, but boy have they had a lot of luck in that period. The Man City match came with a late equaliser, in a match where the goal pretty much represented the only time the ball left their penalty area. Here's a team who are owed one, and if this side isn't going to be set up with attack in mind, I'll be damned if I can think of a match in which it will be. I'd like to think we might have learnt a lesson about giving teams too much respect last week. Yeah, I know, why should this week be any different, but I don't know, I just think it will be. So for that reason, the £2.50 I was going to send to the Premier League Owners Club at compensation for their finally having to consider running things properly will instead be put on a 3-1 win to us, with the third goal coming late on to release some pressure. If that's okay with you, Mr. Winston. Enjoy the game.
We're here in the offices of a Late Late Show with the host of a Late Late Show, James Corden.
Hi.
Big West Ham fan.
Yes. And big knees up Mother Brown, man.
Yeah.
Get on the forum at kumb.com. Come on, you irons.